Hi, Chris. How are you?
Doing great. How
And
about yourself?
how do I say your last name again?
Foulon.
Well, yeah, I knew. And Chris is, for those of you out there that don't know, I have a weekly radio show called And Security for All. And Chris was on my show. Gosh, it's probably been 6 months ago. You can always catch our past shows. You can listen to that show on any place you like to listen to your podcast, but you can go to Voice America, go to the business network, and you'll see my show that plays live every Friday. And you can catch Chris's interview with me. So excited to have you here today. And I will let you I know you're in the DC area. How's everything going in your neck of the woods over there?
The DC area is a tense place right now with what's happening in the world climate. You can only imagine the impacts that could happen to those that live in a national capital region. So yeah,
Yeah,
tense place.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, with that, I know you guys are going to talk about a lot of different things today. So I'm going to pass it off to you, and I will let you go ahead and introduce or have the panel introduce themselves. I want to let our audience know. Don't forget, put your names in the chat so we know you're here. And also, our panel would love to hear some any questions from you guys. Just throw those in the chat box, and our team will feed those questions to the panelists. So with that being said, it's all yours, Chris.
Absolutely. We'll start with the ladies first. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Karen Rouleau. I'm based in Washington State. Been in tech for over 2 decades now and have been involved in cybersecurity almost a decade, back before cyber was even an epidemic. So appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you a little bit about what I'm seeing and what some of the areas that I'm focused on.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. And then next we have Derek. Derek, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, my name's Derek Morris. I'm with, as you can see, Wolf and Company in the background here. We're a CPA firm, 110-year-old CPA firm out of Boston. And I head up the Virtual Chief Information Security Officer service for our national presence across North America, really. And happy to be here. Done this once before. It was a great experience. So I hope to add some content here for us.
Pleasure having you today. And next on, we have Avi. Avi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Chris. Thank you. My name is Avivi. I'm a CISO with Safebreach. With Karen's remark about being a decade with cybersecurity, I've been close to 3 decades now, which makes me feel really, really old. But that's about it.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
And I think at the top of everyone's mind, we have the Russia-Ukraine war. With regards to addressing your boards, what have you potentially changed in regards to addressing the board and communicating any changes that might need to occur? Let's start with you, Karen.
I should, the caveat right now, the role I'm in at Oracle, I'm a strategist for federal and central governments worldwide. So I look out over the landscape at next generation trends and technologies that are relevant. But in my consulting business, where I'm called upon to, talk to boards, talk to groups, talk to leaders about cyber, the answer with regard to logjam was it really depends on the board members and really what their personality types are and what their appetite is for risk. No one really wants to be the bearer of bad news, so you really have to sort of pre-tailor your message. With regard to Log4j and the Ukraine, I tend to keep it really generally mid-level and just talk about how the Ukraine has really essentially become sort of a test kitchen for Russian hackers, and keep it at that level. And then, if they want to go deeper and wider, I can certainly go deeper or wider, but, the individuals I'm talking to really don't have a real high appetite for risk and really don't want a lot of bad news. They don't want to really be told how bad it really is in this current environment that I'm in. So I'll pass it over to you, Avi.
That's interesting that they don't want to hear bad news.
Yeah.
Where, because you would think at the board they would be strategically managing that, and they would want to be aware of that risk. So that's interesting. Derek, with regards to your role, anything special that you've done with regards to that?
Yes. So I'm in a unique situation where I have numerous boards to talk to across different industries. So in industries that aren't even necessarily touching, which is fantastic. So you get a real view of these trends and what is concerning to folks. I find it interesting that a lot of the questions that I get from boards to initiate the conversation stem from what they're reading in the news. I mean, it's not, it's open source content, right? It's out there. Is it right or wrong or valid or not? We don't know, but that's what they take. So what trends I've pulled together to deliver that message is really that heightened sense of awareness. Everyone does their standard security awareness training, X, Y, and Z throughout the year. Now it's more. Be aware of these possible scenarios where someone's asking for money to donate. Be more aware, be more attuned to what's happening out in the world in regards to trying to get people's information or money. The technical controls seem to be understood a bit better now as well. I think that also has something to do with the delivery of the news, because it tends to, here's a threat and here's what you should do. Maybe they understand it or not, but they reiterate it to you, and then kind of you can break it down for them. So the understanding there is really, it's an interesting time, that's for sure. Unfortunate, but the awareness out there is really peaked and it's heightened.
Avi, over at Safebreach, I'm guessing having potential customers all around the world, now you think about the impact of your customers and of their networks. How do you adjust to that?
All right, so I think one of the key things to keep in mind is that cyberspace doesn't really obey physical borders, right? And we've seen CISA and the UK authorities also warning that attacks may pivot over to affect companies around the world. And so what we do at Safebreach, among other things, is making sure that our customers are ready for potential attacks coming in from those threat groups. Now, mind you, it's not limited to just Russian hacktivists or even Ukrainian hacktivists. I mean, obviously, if you take a side in this conflict, you may face repercussions. And so making sure that our customers are aware that those risks may come to their doorstep, and then helping them prepare for it is the best we can do.
So that really then touches on the concept of supply chain risk, and how do you think your customers have adjusted to this new world of major supply chain risks that we've seen through Log4j, Kaseya, SolarWinds, that might have been politically motivated and backed by a state actor?
Right. So I mean, supply chain attacks are sadly going to be with us for the next probably 2 to 3 years at least. And the reality of it is it's a mirror of our kind of digital ecosystem, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are relying on more and more outside vendors and outside sources. And so if you're able to compromise those vendors and sources, then those become vulnerabilities in your environment. And so again, it's important to understand that your environment is not limited to just your applications. It's every vendor that you use in delivering those services and applications that can be impacted by those supply chain attacks. And so you need to test your entire environment and adjust for that.
That insight. And Derek, how do you then convert that entire supply chain as being your threat landscape and quantifying that or qualifying that as a potential risk for these various businesses to communicate to their boards?
Yeah, it rolls right into their vendor management or their third-party management program. And it's gone from this, maybe one step, two step to now a third, fourth step where you have to understand who's involved with who and the relationships there. Now, great, there's technology out there that can help a lot. The traditional way of doing it is got to go by the wayside. It's just not effective or deep enough. That being said, all the vendors that will be of criticality to you should be addressed. That should be understood by the board members as well. It's a who are you using, and making sure that it's not just so and so's friend that recommended it, that it's actually vetted, and to maintain that touch point with that vendor or that vendor's vendor is critical now. It's almost like you have to have real time, hot vendor management for those critical applications, those critical services, and even those critical vendors that you have to use. Very interesting, much more robust than it used to be.
And Karen, with regards to like looking at the future landscape and how things are, how do you then advise that to the board with the changing landscape and what they should look out for?
What I try to do in using the recent Log4j and SolarWinds side attacks is take it right back to the basics, to the human side of what went wrong, and do a lot of storytelling, because really what went wrong with SolarWinds was, when you peeled the onion way back, it was password. The SolarWinds password front door was SolarWinds 123. So we can all kind of laugh about that, because I know arguably some of the smartest guys in the room, no doubt. But you do a survey, they haven't changed their passwords in a year, two. And that's what happened with SolarWinds. So it's the equivalent really of, as people may or may not know, leaving your front door unlocked and your windows cracked when you leave town for your vacation for 2 weeks. It's just so easy to come on in and set up camp and hide out in the network and create some back doors. So until we get back to the human side of cybersecurity, I think this is going to continue.
Okay. And using that storytelling analogy, how do you communicate to see if they really care about cybersecurity, or do they not care about cybersecurity and it's just lumped into all the other risks within their risk portfolio and it's not any different to them?
Yeah, people care because, to the point earlier, it's in the news, it's epidemic, it's every day, it's every week, it's all the time. So, I usually tee things up when I'm talking to individuals or groups with, here's what happened to me. And, in my career, I've had ransomware twice in 2 months. It was quite a while ago, but it's a pretty sickening feeling. To have a skull and crossbones on your machine when you go down in the morning, especially when you're a CISO and you're running a couple different programs and your machine's running really slow because you're running all the malware and doing all the things you're supposed to do. And then I usually step it up a bit and talk about the time I was at the gas station, unbeknownst to me, and got spoofed at the gas station. I mean, really? I should know this. And I would do all the things you're supposed to do at the gas station. I'm secretive. I don't flash my debit card around and all. And, that's pretty much drained the bank account right away. And then another time on a business dinner, it seemed like the waiter had my credit card for quite a while in California, and they made a duplicate and went out shopping and went around and Walmart gift cards, $500 each, all around different parts of Colorado. So that usually gets the audience attention pretty quick. and then they toggle it to their enterprise and how, they too could have this happen to them, and they could be on the front page tomorrow morning, which nobody wants to be.
Karen, that's 3. No more. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Oh no.
Derek, like manage being the vCISO for so many different companies, you get to see a variety of experiences as well. Do you feel they just treat it as just another risk, or do you think they truly separate it and care about it?
So having to do the vCISO, they obviously care about security because they would not engage with us. They know there's a hole there, there's a risk. So how do they fill it? They get someone like myself or some other company that can do vCISO services. So they take it serious. Now, when you're in and you start to look in the closets and under the covers and find out what's what, that's when it really comes to light, like how important is it? Small to mid-sized businesses is where this service lives. So cost always has an eye-opening conversation with somebody. So as you understand the risks and start to, break it down, how to address the risk, is it a person, a process, or a technology you need to do it and do it correctly? The dollars come in and start to really show where the security mindset is. Is it way up there? Is it right down focused? So I get to knock on wood and say they do care. My clients, honestly, they really do care. I haven't had anyone that's really pushed things off and just did a check the box exercise. So I'm humbly lucky.
I mean, being the CEO of Safebreach, I'm guessing by the time they come to you, they potentially care from the CEO level, but how do you help the CEOs talk to their boards to ensure that the boards really care? And it's not just the CISO giving their 2-slide presentation to the board and then they're gone.
Right. I love what Karen said about telling stories, because I think that's the easiest way to connect to the board. And the other thing is you need to connect to the board at the business level. If you just talk technical details, you will lose them. So you need to connect to them at the business level. They need to understand the impact that this may have on a business and work through that. The other thing is, what we find is that you need to have data to back up what you're saying, right? You can't just go with gut feeling. It'll serve you right, 9 out of 10, but at the end of the day, though, when you come to the board to look for more budget or more resources, you have to back it up with some data. So, it's a fine balance that you need to strike here between the data to support what it is that you're asking for and the business story rather than the technical story.
About the business story, do you feel that that's a skill enough CISOs have, that they're able to talk to the business at the business level, or are they too technical?
I think it's a skill they have to have. I mean, if they don't have it now, they need to develop it. And there's plenty of ways of doing that. But at the end of the day, they have to understand the business that they're working in and that they're supporting. Because without it, there's a disconnect between what the business does and what the technical needs are from the security side of the house.
Aaron, how do you help, if you do, in your consulting business, help them create this narrative at the business level to be able to effectively communicate to the board?
I hate to say it depends, because it sounds like such a consulting answer, but it really just does depend, because, a private sector or government is going to have a real different appetite than a publicly traded entity. So, for example, government leaders often cycle through every 2 to 4 years in their roles. So you really have to tailor your urgency a little bit differently. And with any organization, it seems like it comes down to money a lot, because everybody within the organization has different and urgent priorities for budget appropriations. So I oftentimes try to just tailor in the humanistic approach and the urgency needed, because I often stress it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's going to be when it's going to happen. So when a C-level that works for a large state, which will remain nameless, tells me he has a $20,000 budget for cybersecurity to protect the entire state's infrastructure, I get concerned. But in an environment like that, because appropriations haven't been made to shift the funding, it's going to be a matter of when the attack happens to get the funding. Whereas, when I talk, for example, with a bar association for lawyers, very, very different conversation where they're much more motivated to secure the best and bright technologies to continuously patch and improve their existing infrastructures. So again, it just depends.
Eric, hate to state the obvious, but by the time they come to you, you're their CISO, or are you not? Do you help augment existing CISOs to help them with that business communication, or are you the only CISO that they usually have?
Usually it's not the CISO. It would be someone who is trying to move to that as in the augment state, which tends to be, someone at a director level that has that technical acumen, but maybe not that level of speaking where you could bring it down to that storytelling state, like Karen and Avi said, not break it down to what that board level can really, really understand and show trends and numbers in a simple form. That's where the augmenting happens. Otherwise, I'm on my own, or a group of us are on our own to provide this service to, jump in and break down what risks and what threats the business has to an edible state that the board can understand. The committees that are part of the board, audit committee or cybersecurity and IT committees, all of them need to understand in a basic sense what is happening and what it means to them. Banks, financial institutions, they're in the business of being audited. They understand it. So that's an easy one. It's the ones that may be a manufacturing company with no sense of an appetite for risk. So it has to be the message has to be delivered well. And I just love what Avi and Karen said about telling a story. I guess you don't understand you're doing it until you take a real step back and, you break yourself down and realize that you are doing that. It really travels a long way. May hit a point with someone on that board that then can spread it across the whole group,
Well, Karen, you're using a lot of storytelling, but how do you help them turn the bits and bytes into a managed, measured program? It's one thing to say, I'm aware of this risk, but to have it in a managed, measured state where you're able to collect the data about the different feeds and then use that to quantify and make decisions on a risk, how do you then help them get to that state?
I generally partner with another individual to do that part when it gets very, very granular. With what I'm doing, I'm at a much more higher level, at a macro level. So I can't even think of a good example for that. But I generally bring in, the attack surface and use the offense defense analogy. So, the good news is of 1,000 attacks per hour last night, none got in. The bad news is you need patches, you need this next gen technology, and you need 3 more people in your SOC. And then I tend to turn it over to the individual who implements all of that. So I sort of scoot off to the wings while that part happens. So Avi, how about you? How do you handle that?
I think you're on mute there, Avi.
Oh.
Yep, there you go. I started by saying that's a perfect question, because it is an interesting challenge to make sure they understand also that it's not just a one-time capital outlay. You have to support the operationalization of that technology. And you know, as Karen said, you want to also be able to deliver some good news, right? So you said 1,000 attacks, none of them made through. But guess what? You know, we have to have analysts that are sitting and looking at all the signals that we're getting to make sure that we are constantly fine-tuning our controls, making sure that nothing new comes in. So you want to balance those, you know, oh my God, the sky is falling with, you know, but here's some good news. Here's some return on the investment we made in previous quarters. You know, this new supply chain came out, or this new CERT announcement came out about some new tactic that is seen in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. And we were able to validate that we're completely protected against it. So, you know, connect that story to something they might have seen in the news.
That's a great point. I was just thinking about that. It validated against what the indicators of compromise might be, and go down it bit and byte sense, but saying of the 10, we have all 10. Any indicators are going to be identified. That's a great point.
Derek, do you feel that small businesses can really get to that state of a managed, measured program, or is this something only for large enterprises?
No, you can definitely get there. You know, you may have to work closely with IT groups, existing IT. Hopefully they're not outsourced and maybe in-house. There's a lot more traction you can get there, right? So when we do our service delivery, we are bringing in, you know, asking the questions, hey, how many patches last month? How many did we get? Let's be real. Was it 95%? Was it 99%? You know, let's look at the reports. Do we have backup failures all month? And there you can start to deliver the numbers that support those, you know, those cybersecurity domains, those elements of a cybersecurity program, and put that quantifying information there. It takes some time to obviously build the trends, which way we're going. But that's how we can do it from a small business perspective, small and mid-sized business. Enterprises have 101 tools they can use and a bigger budget. So those are great. Those are nice, fancy tools that can do that. It's just a more, you know, more hands-on, a little bit more manual from a small, mid-sized size.
And Chris, I you know, just to add to what Derek said, I think that interestingly enough, the smaller companies may actually have slightly easier time in terms of not being siloed, not getting in their own way of getting things done. So, you know, I've worked with companies that have a separate threat intel, separate group that runs firewalls, separate group that runs the end controls. And sometimes they just don't talk to each other. So a smaller company might actually be more nimble and more agile in dealing with that over the bigger companies with more processes and paperwork.
Aaron, I saw you nodding your head to that. Do you feel that then that creates a blind spot in certain companies, that you're so siloed that they have that blind spot because they think they're covered, but there's these gaps in between?
Yeah, and you know, for me, smaller is sometimes a lot better and more fun. I recently did an exercise with a friend, a fellow geek, and you know, we literally just walked around each other's infrastructure and tried to attack. So, you know, I frantically upgraded my router the night before, upgraded my printer, you know, did all the right things. But the odds are, somebody wants to get in, they're still going to want to get in. So you just got to keep going. So it's in a smaller business, it's great because you can literally walk around and talk to the people and oftentimes physically touch the gear that they have on site. But then I've even found, even when they're 100% bulletproof, all I have to do is lift up something to find that password on the sticky underneath the PC or somewhere. So it's like I can come in after hours and log in. You might want to get rid of that. So
Talking about stories, that's what really started my own security career. was
Yeah.
that password on a keyboard, and I'm like, there's got to be a better way. Derek, what are some of the ways that we can help these smaller and medium-sized businesses improve their security posture so that they can manage their business risk?
Yeah, there's a good set of trends that we're starting to see out there. Initially, the set was 10, 12 items long, and it's whittled down to 4 or 5 basics. And the funny part too is not just trends from business to business or different industry to industry, but from cyber insurance company carriers that are saying you need to do this or you do not. We will not underwrite you. From a technical perspective, it's do what you can around multi-factor authentication. Get it in there. There's so many tools that can be implemented so easily. It should be done right out the gate. And just put your ransomware hat on. Make sure you have backups. Make sure you can recover and test it. You never know if it works until you test it, and you don't want to test it when you're in a situation like Karen ran into with the skull and the crossbones. That's not the time to test. So, understanding those couple of items and really, really enhancing the people part by making sure that the awareness is there and make it a good, engaging way is a challenge, but it's something you can bake into culture quickly. The news helps.
It was funny. Well, it's funny now. It wasn't so funny then, but back in the day when I was attacked with ransomware, you could pay for it using a credit card. So when it happened again the second month, and the guy called me, and obviously from a call center, I called the guy to get my data back. I was so angry and so frustrated. I literally just said, wouldn't it just be easier to get a real job than do this? And at the time I was working at EMC, who owned RSA and Archer, and our chief security officer said, Karen, the guy is doing that all day long. He's making more than you and I do in a week. So probably in a day. So no, it wouldn't be easier for him to get a real job. But I did pay for it with an Amex and then turned around and, canceled the Amex. But people in this day and age are afraid of cryptocurrencies, and that's how you're going to be paying your ransomware, because odds are you better get a little more friendly with the use of cryptocurrencies. So, for example, in some cases, I recently spoke to Australia government, and they have passed a law where the government can now claw back cryptocurrencies used to pay ransomware in both public and private sector. So crypto isn't necessarily a bad thing, because your friends at Visa and Amex aren't going to help you anymore with ransomware.
Avi, what's your exposure with cryptocurrency? I know it could be a double-barreled gun where you think you're paying to a threat actor, but on the other end is a terrorist organization on a sanctions list. How do you understand where the money's going?
Well, that's a real challenge, right? I mean, and frankly, governments are starting to say, look, we don't want you to use cryptocurrency, especially not to pay ransomware. In fact, some companies, some insurance companies, to Derek's point, will not cover you if you pay for ransomware. So, I know that some companies like to have a small bank of Bitcoins, for example, if they get really desperate. But at the end of the day, it's not a practice that I recommend or support. I think that really, if you do your proper cyber hygiene and protect yourself from falling victim to ransomware, that's your best bet rather than investing in cryptocurrency. At least for those purposes.
Yeah, it makes sense. Derek, so we talked a lot about the meat and potatoes of security, patching, vulnerable systems, controls. but does the board even care like what you have to do to ensure that the business is secure? That just the fact that you made the business secure and you mitigated risk.
Yeah, making them understand that it's an ongoing effort. It doesn't stop once you get to a good state. There's the maintenance mode, there's the continuation mode. That has to be very understood. It can be an easy story, right? You don't just cut your grass once. You're gonna have to cut it every week. You have to continue to do it and do it and do it. And there's a cost that too has to be delivered with, how to maintain that low level of risk has a dollar value. So that has to be, clearly identified. It's usually more difficult when you're at zero to get that funding to get to the point where you're maintaining it. So, coming in in a mid state is a little bit easier.
And Karen, coming in at that mid state, and how do you help communicate that message that you're managing the risk for the long term, even though they might not care about all the patching that needs to be done, all the technical work that needs to be done? How do you communicate that story?
I love the cut the grass analogy. And, it's sort of a necessary evil that you've got to talk about patches, and you've got to be bold and explain what a patch is, because most people don't know what a patch is. Why would they care? Why would they want to learn? So you've got to sort of slide the information in a manner that makes it interesting, but you got to give them the information. What's a patch? I remember one time listening to Colin Powell speak, and he felt like Ronald Reagan wasn't really on board with him. And later, Colin Powell said the most interesting thing in his talk. He said, and this was at a cyber conference, he said, it's because President Reagan was thinking about so many other bigger problems than what my list of issues. So that's why I think it's important to educate on, what security controls are available, what's coming, what's interesting, and then understanding, giving an example of what an attack surface looks like. It's sort of a battlefield, and the battle isn't going to be going away. It's continuing to march on. So, the short answer on entering midstream is don't be afraid to educate them, because none of us know it all. And oftentimes they find it pretty interesting that somebody took the time to actually explain what a patch is. We all have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, definitely. Avi, speaking of the hot issues and what a patch is, do you ever keep the board informed of what that changing threat landscape is and how it's changing with regards to threat actors and how they're potentially attacking a certain sector or organizations like your organizations, things like that?
Yeah, so Safebreach is a security vendor, and so obviously we are very interested in what's happening in the threat landscape. But just wanted to go back to a point that Derek mentioned. Going back to the basics and MFA. There was an interesting statistic I saw from Microsoft where they said the adoption rate of MFA is only around 12%, 11 to 12%, which is horrific, because if you think about it, it's one of the simplest things to turn on and one of the most effective defensive. Even if you do, they tell you don't do SMS as a secondary factor, but do anything that gives you that second factor, and you already are so much further ahead than other companies. But getting back to your question about the threat landscape, I mean, again, you have a limited time with the board, right? And you don't want to do, again, a scare session. You want to make sure that they understand that you are monitoring the situation. You are seeing how it applies to the different sectors that you support and what it is that you do about it. And some threats are generic. Threat actors are opportunistic. They'll go after whatever industry, whatever company they can get to, because at the end of the day, money is money, right? They'll they'll do whatever they can to get that. But at the same point, there's something to be said about having that defense in depth or multi-layer security, whatever term you want to use. Patches are not your silver bullet. They're not going to do everything for you. Plus, sometimes you just cannot apply patch the same day it comes out, because guess what? You have to do testing. You have to validate that it doesn't do anything in the meantime. So how do you provide coverage in the meantime to prevent a vulnerability from being exploited?
Yeah, absolutely. And Derek, supporting many companies, do you inform them of changes in the threat landscape, say potentially regulatory issues or other issues, or is it just focused on the technical?
Definitely regulatory issues as well. The technical happen. There's such a good amount of resources out there that happen in a good timed manner. You got CISO now, that's fantastic. CERT's been around for a while. There are other groups too that you could subscribe to and get that information. But the regulatory ones, those aren't questions. Those are statements. Those are, you have to do this. This is not recommended. We are telling you. So those are the ones that get high priority, especially if you're a financial institution or maybe some other company with a regulatory obligation. They have to know that quickly. Usually there's going to be someone else in the organization that's obviously part of their job, but to come in and enhance it with the technical piece that can help with that regulatory statement to put in place, that's where good value comes in. You get the whole picture. An easy example is recently in the banking industry, they reduced the time to report an incident. So now it went from 48 to 72 hours down to 36 hours. It doesn't go into effect until May, but the institutions in banking and credit unions have to know about this, and they have to understand the impact. And someone has to own that and be very clear on how they're going to do it and when they should do it. So it gave a kind of a rebirth to looking at your incident response plan and look at your playbooks and who's involved, and understanding your communication groups, who's going to own it and report it when it has to be done. There was some, not real defined dollars to it, but resources and efforts to do that, to get that in place, turned into, real value for that institution, especially in the banking world.
Makes sense. Karen, earlier you mentioned that you were a victim of ransomware. How would you dictate to the board that potentially the company's been a victim, their backup's been corrupted, and there's no way back? How do you communicate that, and then how do you institute controls to correct that?
That's a big question. So what was the first part? How do we communicate it? Well, usually what I do is we never pay ransom. So what I do is I talk about the utility grid, and I use the analogy, well, then let's just shut all the power off. Because if you're not going to pay a ransomware, let's just cut the power to the building. That's the first example of what's going to happen to the business. So let's just hypothetically see how long we can do. And we're going to do fine for about 3 days. And then we're going to be out of supply chain. We're going to be out of water. And then they start leaning in, and that gets their attention. And then I use the hospital analogies of who's the hospitals who've been attacked, who try to get by with, passing hard copy charts and, sticky notes and going back the old way. That works for under a day. It just doesn't work. So I'm going to stop there, because that's about as far as I've taken it, because usually at that point they're like, we got to have our lifeblood. We got to keep the business going. We can't be brought to our knees. What can we do? What are the alternatives? And that's when the discussion begins. And more often than not, sadly, they pay it.
And Derek, you pay this ransom. They never give you a key. You have a encrypted backup that was potentially on site. What are your options?
This is a story that comes up in these response efforts that we test. It really, you're going to have to find out what the risk appetite is. What is the enterprise's risk level that they want to get to? You want to take that risk and pay them, and you're operating at a high, medium level of risk. Okay, that's the path you want to take. If that risk is low, where we see, low, medium in the middle, you're probably not. You're probably going to continue to look for assistance somewhere, whether it be FBI, local enforcement somehow, state level. Keep digging through IT's, backup disks, wherever you can do, you're going to keep going through that. So it really depends on your risk level. A high risk, startup that really wants to get things going, my goodness, they probably would pay it and just keep moving forward. Hopefully learn a lesson, right? Hopefully contact one of us.
To chime in on that, I think that, again, going back to the fundamentals is really, really important. I mean, if you do backups and you don't test them on a monthly basis, you're doing something wrong. I'm sorry. If you don't do business continuity, proper business continuity planning and testing, then you're likely to be to fall victim to this, because part of your testing should be imagining a scenario where you lose all your systems. What then? Do you just shutter your business and say, okay, let's look for a new position? Or do you have a plan? Do you have resources in place to rebuild when you don't have that data immediately available to you? So you have to test your backups. You have to make sure that you have the controls in place to allow you to restore from a complete disaster.
Aaron, we've been going back and forth, and a lot of the challenges that we've seen with regards to communicating to the board is really that communication style, breaking it down to storytelling and not trying to be so technical. In the past, CISOs have never really reported directly to the CEO. They've always reported up to a CIO or someone else. What are some of the strange alignments you've seen for CISOs, and potentially why was that a good fit for that organization?
I don't know if it's strange, but I think it's good news. I'm just seeing so many more, chief data officer roles, chief artificial intelligence roles, so many other interesting new roles are coming into play in organizations, both in government and in corporate world and the private sector. And generally what I'm seeing are these folks have a pretty solid understanding of the cybersecurity and privacy governance also. So I find that refreshing. And I don't even begin to understand how organization charts work. I've worked in the corporate world for over 2 decades, and 1 year you could report to the CEO, and the next year you could report to marketing. It's crazy. It's crazy. So I've always wondered who has that job to move the charts around in the back rooms. So I don't get too hung up on that. I just tend to go over the wall or around the wall or under the wall when a message needs to be heard and it's time to rally the troops. Dotted lines just get set aside because the loudest voice gets the attention.
Avi, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Karen. I mean, at the end of the day, I've been in situations where you report to the CRO, to legal, to the CFO. I reported to the CEO, and I reported to the CTO. As long as you feel like you have a certain level of independence, that you're not beholden to the business goals of your manager, and you are not afraid to make your voice heard, then it doesn't matter. Your role is very simple. you need to manage risk for the company. You need to mitigate it, and you need to enable the business and facilitate the business to do what it needs to do, which means taking on risk. Your job is to just minimize it or mitigate it. So you, as Karen said, if you report to the CMO and you can still do that, that's fine.
Derek, with regards to you, have you seen any mixtures or conflicts of interest that don't align well with a reporting structure for the CISO?
I always felt it challenged reporting through finance, whether it be CFO or controller, because any conversation always went back down to, well, how much is that going to cost? How much is that going to cost us? So there's a level of angst with that. You know, this risk is too big. It's going to cost too much. I always felt the challenge that way. But outside of that, I love what Avi said. Just, it doesn't matter who you report to. The independence is there. And then what Karen said, be the loudest voice in the room, have the message dialed in and deliver it correctly. That's what's really going to help you. You could report to anybody. Dotted line to this CIO or, full line to the CEO. It's fluff. If you're strong in your CISO position, it shouldn't really matter. And, personal relationships, cultural wise should assist too. I mean, you gotta talk about that elephant in the room, building that relationship with somebody on a day-to-day basis. More challenging now by Zoom, but there's still opportunities there to talk and become closer and have people understand you and where your message is going to come from.
Question from the audience. I'll pick Avi first. Any tools that you've used in the past when ransomware has gone undetected and to try to recover?
So I'll try and stay vendor agnostic here, and not to say that one tool is necessarily better than the other. It's just that what I find 9 out of 10 was if the tool failed to detect something, it's typically because it wasn't configured correctly. And that's part of the problem. I mean, we sometimes buy tools and we assume that they're good out of the box to do whatever they need to do. The reality of it, you need to customize controls. So to say that a tool failed to detect something, it's typically more of an operator error than a tool's issue.
Derek, in regards to you from a independence perspective, as a consultant, any challenges with that independent reporting standpoint that you touched on earlier?
Yes. So in the role that I'm in, we usually are coming, let's just take banking, for example. I hate to go back to banking. Banking, we're always going to report to a committee by a dotted line. So ultimately, your voice will get heard by this committee, whether it be audit committee or cyber committee, members of the board that make up these committees and different directors in the business. When there is no report to an external source as well, and it's just to a CIO or to someone in a CEO or a COO role, when the line stops there, that's when the independence kind of goes away because the message can be stopped. I don't see it a ton, but it can be.
Okay. We're getting to the top of the hour. Karen, if you had to give one takeaway from this whole session, what would that be for an up-and-coming CISO to be able to effectively communicate to the board?
Well, I'm going to answer that with and just sort of touch on the earlier question about the security tools and ransomware. For an up-and-coming is be curious. Don't ever lose your curiosity, because that's what really helps you succeed in this business, because it's all about sort of having an affinity to play detective to figure this out. And some of the best advice I got was probably circa 2016. I was at an RSA conference, and it was right after I was out on the exhibitors floor, and it was after the Sony attack. And I was talking to FireEye, who had a really impressive booth, and they were briefing me on the Sony attack. And I started asking questions, and their chief security officer walked me across the carpet to Palo Alto, and they said to me together, well, we contacted them. We needed help because no one vendor has it all. And oftentimes infrastructures can continue to load more and more and more and more endpoint security and the latest and greatest on, and sooner or later you get a Christmas tree that has too many ornaments over on it and it just topples. So just know that nobody has one complete end-to-end. So you're always going to have to be aligning and partnering with other respected organizations to solve these problems.
Avi, same question for you. You've been an experienced CISO and CEO now. What advice would you give to your replacement coming behind you to be able to talk to the board?
So CISO, I've not been promoted to CEO quite yet. So, and I don't know that I want that role, frankly. I enjoy CISO a little bit too much. The key thing, again, is going back to know the business. Understand the business that your company is in so that you can translate those risks a whole lot better, both up and down, because it does matter. Context matters. If you can provide context to the board as to what you're trying to achieve and context to your security organization and your IT as to why you're looking for them to implement something, you'll be much further ahead than most.
Oh, context. Yeah, that's definitely important today because advice can be good or bad depending on the context. Derek, what about yourself? How do you prepare those that bring you on to help build up a program? What's the last thing you tell them before you let them swim on their own?
Yeah, I love what Karen said with the be curious. That's how it is. Reading those books and understanding what's out there, reading the articles and talking to people at events just like us. That's one mechanism. In trying to break out of the technical shell, if you come from a technical perspective, try to break out of that shell and break it down. Try to explain to your children a piece of technology, and if they can understand it, you won. Or tell your mom what you do for a job, and if you can and she understands it, you've done a great job. You've explained it in the right context. So it's hard. It's hard to walk away and do that. I just think that's a big piece to it, is because a lot of us come from that technical background, and breaking out of that technical shell is a key piece.
Oh, what a great panel. I mean, we've rounded it out from the technical bits and bytes to getting ready to be a CISO yourself. Thank you all for joining us today. And any last parting words before Kim joins us? Karen?
No, I don't think so. It's, a lot of, and just stay curious and be sure to reread Kevin Mitnick's book, Ghost in the Wire, because oftentimes it's just human fallibilities that cause this. It's a goofy password, or it's a receptionist or somebody passing a phone call on that lets them in.
Great book.
It's a great book.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there. I do want to say that CISA has a lot of great resources at whatever level of maturity you're in. So definitely check out their site. They have advice that, again, to every aspect of your security program.
And last word for Derek?
I just think be humble and ask for help. Not everybody knows everything. There are so many people out there that can focus on a certain area and help you get through that and get you prepared. That's where this vCISO role just plays great, is someone can reach out and say, I need help. I have no clue what I'm doing. Let's do that.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll bring Kim back on to wrap up this session.